Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we meet again on the air in this week's edition of Men and Nature, aired on Radio IKIM. Before we proceed with this week's discussion, let us briefly recap what we discussed last week with Dr. Muhammad Husni bin Muhammad Amin, Fellow, Centre for Science and Environment Studies, Institute of Islamic Understanding, Malaysia. We talked about ethical failures and man-made disasters. Dr. Husni last week highlighted examples from history to show that religious values, integrity, as well as ethics are important in ensuring that due diligence is made. Through this way, we will at least have taken the necessary effort in avoiding or minimizing the risk of disasters. Ladies and gentlemen, moving on to this week's topic, we will shift our attention to the issue of climate change and its relationship to agriculture. As such, we are honoured to have with us in the studio Dr. Raihan binti Ismail, who is Senior Lecturer, Programme for Applied Science and Islamic Studies, Academy of Islamic Studies, University Malaya. She holds a PhD from Kyoto University in Japan, and she will be sharing her thoughts with us on the topic agriculture and climate change. Assalamualaikum, Dr. Raihan.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you for being able to join us in Men and Nature. So, Dr. Raihan, we will be talking about agriculture and climate change. Perhaps as an introduction, could you please explain briefly about agriculture and climate change in general terms?
Okay, thank you for having me again here. Okay, I would like to share about a relationship between agriculture and climate change. So first of all, before we go in details about our topic today, let me share a brief information about agriculture and climate change. Agriculture is the science, art, and cultivation of crops for food, fuel, and other products. It involves the production of food and other products through the cultivation of crop, raising livestock, and management of land and water resources. If you look back at the history of agriculture, about 10,000 years ago, during the Neolithic period, people started to shift from the hunter-gatherer lifestyle to a more settled way of life. At that time, they only practice simple farming through the cultivation of crop and also the domestication of animals. So by the time, over time, agriculture, technology and innovation evolved. So they also started to learn about new techniques in doing agriculture activities. The rise of agriculture in different regions of the world has played a significant role in the development of human civilization and societies. For example, agriculture has played a significant role in the development of ancient civilizations such as the Egyptian, the Mayan, and the Chinese. So this agriculture has played a significant role to increase and develop their civilization in the complex societies. And then throughout history, agriculture has faced many challenges. For example, wars, climate change such as hurricanes, flood. But until today, agriculture still remain a critical component in food security and the economy to meet the demand of the growing population and also the changing climate. And then now we look into the climate change. So what is climate change? Climate change refers to a long-term changes in the average weather pattern that have come to define to the Earth's local and global climate. Okay, these changes can caused by variety of factors. For example, natural processes such as the sun intensity and also by human activities such as deforestation, changes in land use, and also burning of the fossil fuels. Okay, one of the most significant human contribution to climate change is the emission of the greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide from the livestock cultivation and also for the rice cultivation. The process is called greenhouse effect. Okay, the impacts of climate change are widespread and far-reaching. So there are several impacts of climate change on the environment. For example, the increase of the greenhouse gas emission, for example, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. So this is come from the activity of agriculture, for example, the livestock production and rice cultivation. And climate change also shift the weather patterns. Okay, for example, it cause the amount and distribution of precipitation, and also the frequency and intensity of the extreme weather condition, for example flood, and then hurricanes and heat waves. Okay, so these are the effects of the climate change that contribute to the um, changing of the environment.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Dr. Raihan, for that introduction on our topic, agriculture and climate change. And most definitely, as you said, agriculture played a very important role throughout the history of mankind. You mentioned a few civilizations, Egyptian, Chinese, Mayan, even in the Islamic civilization also, there have been significant contribution by the Muslim thinkers, Muslim scholars to the development of agriculture. Now, Dr. Raihan, you mentioned briefly about this, but perhaps you can elaborate further. What are the impacts of agriculture on climate change?
Okay, climate change and agriculture is intertwined. So means that agriculture can cause climate change, and climate change can also affect the agricultural activities. So the relationship of agriculture and climate change is complex. So agriculture has both direct and indirect impacts on climate change. Direct impact, for example, the emission of greenhouse gases, as I said before, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide that comes from the livestock, and then also from the rice cultivation. And then the indirect impact is, for example, from human activities such as deforestation, and then to expand the agricultural land and soil degradation, which can lead to the carbon emission. Agriculture production can have a positive and negative impact on climate change depending on the agricultural practices. The effect of agriculture and climate change can vary depending on the several factors, such as the types of agricultural activities, and then the geographical location, and also the place which the activities are carried out. For example, maybe a non-agricultural land or agricultural land. So the impacts will be different. So these factors also play an important role in determining the long-term impact of agriculture on climate change. So actually, agriculture is the major contributor, okay, to the emission of greenhouse gases, where it has a significant implication to the climate system. Okay, overall, it has been estimated about 25% of greenhouse emission comes from agriculture. So it's quite a huge number. It means that agriculture make a significant contribution to the climate change. Okay, there are several ways how agriculture can affect the climate change. First one is through the greenhouse gas emission. Okay, agriculture is responsible as the major contributor to the greenhouse emission, for example, from the livestock and also rice cultivation. Okay, so and then the second one is deforestation, which is the human activity. Okay, when we do the deforestation, cutting trees to open an agricultural land, so this will contribute to the climate change because the loss of tree can make that the carbon emission more than usual. So because plants has very important to absorb carbon dioxide. Okay, so it's very important that we have to protect our forests. Okay, and then soil degradation. Okay, poor agricultural practices such as overtilling can affect the soil degradation. Okay, and also can contribute to the release of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And then lastly is water management. Irrigation system for agriculture can consume large amount of water. So if we do not conserve water efficiently, it will impact to the climate change with the significant impact on local water resources and also water quality. Okay, that's all.
You mentioned that agriculture and climate change are intertwined. The relationship is complex. You also shared with us how agriculture impacts on the climate. Now, perhaps you can share with our listeners, how does climate change affect agriculture?
Okay, this is a very a serious problem in the world right now, okay, and all over the world, which is the climate change that affect agriculture, okay, because as we mentioned just now about the what is the climate change, what the impact on the environment. So also for the agricultural sector, climate change has significant impacts toward the agricultural activities. Okay, there are several ways how climate change impacts on agriculture. Okay, first one is the changing in temperature and precipitation pattern. Okay, because climate change causing the changes in the timing, duration, and also the intensity of the rainfall, as well as the amount of temperature. Okay, so this will affect the growth of the crops, leading to the reduce of the yield. Okay, so and then climate change also increase the frequency and severity of the extreme weather events such as the hurricane, flood, and also heat wave. So this event will damage and affect the crop yield, and also not only crop but also the agricultural resources, okay, and also infrastructure. And then climate change also affecting agriculture by the rise of sea level. Okay, as the sea level rise, coastal area becoming more vulnerable to the saltwater intrusion and the flooding. So this condition also can damage crops and also reduce the yield. Okay, and then climate change also can cause the changes in pest and disease patterns by altering the distribution of timing of pests and diseases. Okay, this condition can make that control of pests more difficult than usual, and this will leading to the crop damage. Next is the impacts on water availability. Okay, changes in the temperature and precipitation patterns can affect water availability for irrigation and other agricultural areas. So this also can lead to water scarcity and can reduce the crop yield. Lastly, climate change can affect soil erosion, okay, because it can increase the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events such as hurricanes. This can lead to the soil degradation and impact the ability of the land to support agriculture.
Right. Also, when climate change affects precipitation, it can also result in increased rainfall, cause flooding,
Yeah.
and perhaps damage areas which are usually used for agriculture. And definitely, we can see that the impacts of climate change on the agricultural sector is very huge. So, Dr. Raihan, how can we actually reduce these adverse effects of agriculture on climate change?
Okay, so in order to adapt and also mitigate the impact of agriculture on climate change, there are several ways that we can do. Okay, firstly, we can do sustainable farming practices. Okay, for example, by reducing tillage, using crop rotation, using cover crops, intercropping. By doing these practices, the farmers especially can make the soil more healthy, so that it will reduce the impact of agriculture on climate change. And then we can also practice precision agriculture. Okay, precision agriculture, which is the agriculture that use the technology. For example, the artificial intelligence for the precision planting and fertilization. This can help optimize the yield and also reduce the agricultural inputs such as the fertilizers, and also reducing the greenhouse gas emission. Another practice that we can use is conservation agriculture. Conservation agriculture practices such as the agroforestry, where we incorporate crops in the forest land, and also the use of conservation tillage can reduce to help the greenhouse gas emission, conserve soil moisture, and also increase the carbon sequestration potential on agricultural land. The next practice is improving the livestock management practices, such as reduce the enteric fermentation and improve manure management. This can help also to reduce the greenhouse gas emission from livestock sector, as I mentioned before, because one of the major contributor to the greenhouse gas emission is methane. Okay, so this is come from the livestock sector. And then we also can increase the use of the renewable energy sources, okay, such as wind and solar power, instead of using the power plant, okay, in agriculture to reduce the greenhouse gas emission and also to improve the energy efficiency. Okay, and then the government also can provide support and in terms of financial training to the farmers to make them access to the technology to increase the ability to adopt the sustainable agricultural practices. Okay, so then also this can lead also to reduce the impact on the climate change. And then lastly, we can encourage businesses, government and also consumers to adopt sustainable procurement practices such as consume locally grown product instead of buying from the outside of the countries.
Okay. Something that you mentioned triggered my thoughts. You mentioned about crop rotation. I think if you look at the history of the Islamic civilization, one of the, or rather some of the pioneers that introduced the idea of crop rotation were Muslim scholars, Muslim scientists, people like Ibn Washiyah, Ibn al-Baitar, Ad-Dinawari. Ad-Dinawari, for example, wrote a very well-known encyclopedia, Kitab An-Nabat, which listed, I think, more than 300 types of plants which can be referred to by farmers, so that they can they will know what plant to what crop to plant where, how much water to be used, what type of soil is suitable, and the sorts. So I think this sort of knowledge is very important when it comes to agriculture. And I'm sure that today, with advancements in technology, this sort of information is also critical for our present-day farmers. Dr. Raihan, earlier you mentioned about the mitigation strategies to reduce the effects of agriculture on climate change. What about the other way around? How can we mitigate the impacts of climate change on the agricultural sector?
Okay, when it comes to the how to mitigate the impact of climate change on the agriculture sector, so this means is how do we improve the agriculture production by not harming the environment. So we have to have a resilient and efficient agriculture. So what we can do is improving soil management. Okay, because soil health is very crucial for the successful agriculture. Okay, so to mitigate the effects of climate change, we have to practice such as reducing tillage, adding organic matter, and also doing rotating crops to improve the soil health and increase the capacity to store carbon. Okay, next we can also implement the water conservation measures. Okay, for example, using the drip irrigation and also rainwater harvesting system. Okay, in order to conserve water, so that the farmer can adapt to the changing water availability. And then we can also do the diversification of crops. Okay, instead of doing monoculture, which is only plant one type of crop, we can plant many crop, maybe 2 or 3 crops, so that this also can increase the resilience, okay, to the climate change. Planting crops, we can also plant also crop that well adapted to the extreme climatic condition. Okay, for example, using the crop varieties that can have tolerance to the flood, for example, to the heat waves. Okay, and then we can also practice agroforestry. Okay, agroforestry and also integrated farming system. Okay, agroforestry is the combination of the agriculture and forest, which mean we can incorporate, we can plant trees in the forest. Okay, that's by this type of agriculture we can also reduce the activity of deforestation. Okay, because usually we have to cut trees, okay, to open an agricultural land. Okay, but this is sort of conservation agriculture. Okay, and then this can help also helping farmers to adapt to the climate condition. And then we can also develop promote climate smart agriculture practices, or CSA. Okay, this is also have been implemented in Malaysia. Okay, there are research doing by Mardi about this climate smart agriculture. Okay, this is a very important approach, okay, to reduce greenhouse gas emission, increase agricultural productivity and resilience, and at the same time enhance food security. And then we can also do more research. So the government also have to invest on research and development to develop new crop varieties, technologies, and also practices that can better suited the changing climate environment. So this can also help farmers to adapt to the impact of the climate change on agriculture. Okay, lastly, the government also have to provide support for farmers, okay, in terms of policies, training and financial incentive that can promote them to adopt sustainable agriculture practices and doing climate smart agriculture practice. Okay, so and then we can also encourage farmers to do extension services and also provide them with the market access so that it's easier for them to market their products.
Dr. Raihan, in my introduction, I actually mentioned that your PhD was from Kyoto University.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, your master's is from the Tokyo Agricultural University.
Yeah.
Okay. This is just trying to get your view.
Mm.
What lessons can we learn from Japan when it comes to agriculture?
Okay. From my previous experience learning from in Japan, so actually they are very critical in food security and safety. So means that they are very encouraged to do organic farming and sustainable farming activities to make sure that they get the healthy food. Okay, because if we look at the traditional agriculture or conventional agriculture, basically the farmers spend money and also fertilizers, yes, chemical fertilizers and also chemical pesticides to reduce the pests in their farms. But in Japan, most farmers they shift from the conventional agriculture to the organic farming and also sustainable practices, where they reduce the use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. So because they are very much into healthy lifestyle, so that makes that they want to get healthy and nutritious crop. So this is, we can get this from practicing sustainable agriculture and organic farming.
So this is something that you would recommend for us to adopt in Malaysia. Yeah. Okay, Dr. Raihan, perhaps you have some take-home points or concluding remarks regarding our topic today.
Okay, so we already know that agriculture and climate change is intertwined, means that agriculture can also cause climate change, and agriculture can be affected by climate change. So in order to ensure food security and food safety in Malaysia or globally, we have to work together. Okay, not only one parties but all parties, government, businesses, consumers and farmers. We have to work together to promote, okay, and enhance the sustainable agricultural practices to ensure the food security. And then we have to always ready for the extreme climate condition, so that the farmers can reduce the loss that they have spent, and also to increase the resilience and efficiency of agriculture. And then, okay, I want to share a bit research, okay, that's studied by Netherlands. Okay, they did research about the tomato planting, where they plant tomato in a very high-tech greenhouse, which can produce about 80 kilogram per square meter. Okay, but compared to the tomato plant that planted in the open field, they can only get 4 kilogram per square meter. So it's a very huge difference, okay, compared to the one that planted in the glass house with high-tech agriculture technology. So and also interestingly, they only use less time, 4 times less water than the one in the open field. So it means that they have a very resilient and also efficient agriculture practice. So we can use this example to work on to get this type of agriculture production.
Thank you, Dr. Raihan, for sharing your thoughts. Also, some of the examples that you have given has been, I think, to me, thought-provoking. because if other countries can do this kind of things, then I think we in Malaysia should also seriously look at ways to ensure that our agriculture sector is sustainable and is less impacted by climate change. Thank you again, Dr. Raihan, for your thoughts on agriculture and climate change. It is worth remembering that agriculture played an important role in history, as you mentioned earlier. I'd like to highlight the role that it played in the Islamic civilization. We have seen many advancements made in the areas of knowledge, in many areas of knowledge, including engineering, mathematics, botany, meteorology, mineralogy, and others. And all these were catalyzed by the agriculture sector. The importance of agriculture has also been mentioned in the Quran as well as many hadith. For example, in verse 60 of Surah An-Naml, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the effect that who has created the heavens and the earth, and who sends you down rain from the sky? Yes, with it we cause to grow well-planted orchards full of beauty of delight. It is not in your power to cause the growth of the trees in them. Can there be another God besides Allah? No, they are a people who swerve from justice. So essentially, agriculture sector, the crops that we plant, the crops that we cultivate, that produce the food are all signs of the might of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Crops are one of the bounties from Allah, and therefore we should be grateful for them. And one of the ways to show our gratitude is by looking after the environment and ensure that we do not cause problems like climate change to worsen. Thank you, Dr. Raihan binti Ismail, Senior Lecturer, Program for Applied Science and Islamic Studies, Academy of Islamic Studies, University of Malaya, for joining me in the last half an hour in our program Men and Nature. I'm sure that our discussion this week has been very informative and beneficial to our listeners, inshallah. And to our listeners, Men and Nature can be followed either on Radio IKIM or on IKIM FM's Facebook page. Please share and forward this discussion with everyone so that its benefits can be more widespread, inshallah. Thank you again. I hope to see you in future editions of Men and Nature. That's all the time that we have for this week in Men and Nature. Next week, we will continue with our discussion on issues pertaining to disasters and climate change, looking at another dimension with another guest, inshallah. To find out more, please stay tuned to Men and Nature at the same time next week. Until we meet again, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.